Right, so a shortened version of the standing order issued to the Israeli Air Force upon returning from airstrikes committed against Iran during their 12-day conflict might essentially have read, in case of unused bombs, break Gaza. As it turns out that following those strikes on Iran and upon the flight home, they looped back across Gaza and, rather than land with munitions still on board, decided to drop their leftover payloads on the already obliterated strip. Not because Gaza posed any new threat, not because of any fresh intelligence, not because it was en route back to base, because it wasn't. It was actually a detour to fly across Gaza. They did it simply because Gaza was there, convenient, captive, condemned. What began as a grotesque claim of logistical efficiency quickly mutated into formal policy, so that this became routine, day after day. Gaza reduced to a live-fire dumping ground because the people there weren't already suffering enough. In a world where war crimes are casually folded into flight plans and genocide becomes a bureaucratic checkbox, this story, shocking as it is, an absolute scandal, has gone almost entirely unreported. Perhaps because Iranian strikes simply superseded it. Perhaps because too many in the world have become numbed to Gaza. Or perhaps because for Israel, bombing Gaza isn't news at all anymore. Just another day. Right, so the Israeli Air Force, the IAF, apparently made it formal policy during the 12-day bombardment of Iran last month to unload unused munitions over the Gaza Strip each time its jets returned from Iranian airspace, as if we didn't think they were sick enough already. This grotesque practice, apparently occurring with chilling regularity from June 13th through to June 24th, was more than just a logistical decision. It is the violent manifestation of a genocidal mindset. It has gone almost entirely unreported by mainstream Western outlets, buried beneath headlines that focus solely on Iran, despite the massive human cost inflicted on Gazans as a result of that, on top of what Israel was already meting out on them. Israel's dual-front aggression, far from demonstrating military sophistication or anything like cleverness, laid bare a ruthless doctrine instead, where Gaza served as a literal weapons dump and Palestinian life counted for nothing. Here's an excerpt from The Cradle laying it all out as one of the few outlets who have actually covered this. Israeli fighter pilots returning from air defense missions during the 12-day war with Iran were routinely authorized to unload their leftover munitions on the Gaza Strip, according to a 2nd of July report by Maariv. The move, initially a pilot-led initiative to assist Israeli ground forces in Khan Yunis and northern Gaza, was quickly expanded by Air Force Commander Tomer Bar into a daily operational policy across all squadrons. The report outlines how during the operation, pilots assigned to intercept missiles and drones launched from Iran were equipped not only with air-to-air missiles, but also with air-to-surface munitions. After completing their Iran-related missions, pilots contacted Gaza operation control rooms and offered to drop remaining bombs on designated targets in the enclave. Air Force officials embraced the initiative. Within hours, the ad hoc proposal became standard practice, with squadrons instructed to coordinate with ground units before landing and to strike Gaza Hamas targets on their return. Israel's initial provocation came in the form of deep strikes against Iranian nuclear and military facilities, a series of illegal preemptive attacks under the guise of national security. But as the IAF returned from these sorties, often with unused air-to-air or air-to-ground munitions, pilots sought approval to dispose of this hardware over Gaza rather than bring it back. What began as individual requests quickly became institutionalized under the direction of IAF Commander Major General Tomer Bar. Gaza, already battered from 20 months of genocidal warfare at that point, was subjected to new bombardments not because of fresh provocations, because the jets happened to be flying home overhead. The official justification offered by Israeli sources, including the Ministry of Defense, was that these actions were a matter of operational efficiency, a means of maintaining pressure on Hamas while managing resources. However, this logic completely collapses under the most basic scrutiny. First, munitions disposal in populated civilian areas directly convenes the laws of armed conflict and the principles of proportionality and distinction as outlined in the Geneva Conventions. Second, there is no credible evidence that the bombing targets legitimate military assets. In many cases, bombs were just dropped in residential areas, agricultural areas, and refugee camps, just wherever they were directed to, suggesting that the policy was more about spectacle and domination than strategy. Although the first few bomb drops may have involved pilots making impromptu in-flight decisions, this quickly evolved into a formalized protocol. Also, according to the Cradle and also the Mer news agency, the IAF High Command began pre-authorizing a list of sites in Gaza for return flights to strike, regardless of whether they had any immediate connection to Hamas operations. These included known infrastructure points of civilians already hit in previous waves of attacks, But it saved launching fresh jets to strike Gaza when they already had jets in the air, you see, making war and genocide as efficient as possible. This institutionalization of terror transformed Gaza into a perpetual target board at Israeli convenience off the back of its conflict with Iran. The use of leftover munitions created a new tempo and scale in Israel's assault on Gaza. I mean, what an attitude to munitions. We've got them, so we need to use them. We have to use them. We might as well finish this lot off, hadn't we? Let's just dump what is left on Gaza. Data from Gaza's health authorities indicate that over 800 Palestinians were killed during the 12-day period of Iran's strikes, a significant increase compared to previous weeks. Is the use of leftover bombs on Gaza even legal? Well, colour me surprised, the answer is, of course, a resounding no. International humanitarian law explicitly prohibits the use of force that is not necessary or proportionate to the given military objective. Repurposing bombs meant for a different conflict in a different theatre of war for use on a captured civilian population constitutes a textbook war crime. Just one more to add to the very long and ever-growing list. The Geneva Conventions demand distinction between combatants and civilians, a principle Israel has flaunted repeatedly. No credible evidence has emerged that these return flight strikes were surgical or necessary. The psychological and tactical implications of using Gaza as a dumping ground are profound. Not only does it expose the utter disregard for Palestinian life, but it also situates Gaza as a functionally dehumanized space with Israeli military thinking, a test site, a pressure valve, garbage chute. This policy of daily bombings underscores Israeli desensitization and impunity, that these actions were not only carried out but proudly leaked to their press, those interested at least. Those who gave a damn by military sources speaks volumes. Israel, emboldened by the support or silence of Western governments, no longer feels the need to even hide its war crimes. Palestinians are not only demonized and confined, they are also made to absorb the excesses of other wars Israel chooses to fight. From a tactical perspective, the IDF appears to have embraced this dual-front military doctrine now. Fight Iran, punish Gaza whilst we're at it. This raises serious legitimate concerns if this isn't addressed and nipped in the bud. Happens in future conflicts when Israeli jets return from Lebanon or Yemen or Iran again. Will Gaza remain the default blast zone for all of them? A dumping ground for munitions that they just have to use and can't possibly hang on to for another day? The normalization of this behaviour sets a catastrophic precedent for the entanglement of separate war fronts, reducing the lives of Palestinians to collateral consequences in wars they don't even have a role in. Despite the scale and brazenness of these actions, international institutions have largely remained silent. Human rights organisations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have issued general condemnations of Israel's conduct in Gaza, but none have yet launched targeted investigations into this leftover bomb policy. I dare say some of that is down to how little this has been reported, though. The United Nations has similarly failed to act decisively. Well, there is a surprise, isn't there? Illustrating once again the deep flaws in the international accountability system. Media coverage, especially in the West, has also been sparse to non-existent on this. Compare this with the saturation coverage of Israeli strikes on Iran, and it becomes clear that Palestinian suffering remains an acceptable form of collateral damage in mainstream narratives. It is impossible to separate this military strategy from Netanyahu's domestic politics, though, because we all know that's why he is making so much war. Facing escalation protests, international criticism, and that corruption trial, which is still lingering over his head, Netanyahu has repeatedly used war as political cover when things get a little bit tricky for him. Bombing of Gaza during the Iran strikes conveniently allowed him to continue fighting on all fronts, rallying his nationalist base and diverting attention from his legal troubles, finding the most efficient way to do it whilst he's at it. So his message to Gaza was, even if we're not fighting you, even when we're prioritising fighting Iran over you, as Netanyahu declared at the time that Iran was the bigger issue, we can still bomb you and we still will bomb you. This tactic, despite having been floated by one pilot and adopted as policy by Tomer Bar, is not incidental or unique either. It's the logical extension of a military culture that has long embraced disproportionate force. The so-called Dahir Doctrine, used in Lebanon in 2006 and later in Gaza, called for overwhelming retaliation and destruction of civilian infrastructure to deter resistance. What we're hearing about here, that happened last month, was its evolution, if you like. Not just overwhelming response, but casual and opportunistic bombing at that. In this way, Israel institutionalizes violence even further than it already had, making it routine and bureaucratically efficient. This chilling development suggests that Israel has normalized Gaza as a space for military improvisation more than it already had. We already knew that Israel sold armored vehicles, for example, and the likes as battle-tested. Well, they're battle-tested by using the population of Gaza as guinea pigs. And if you live in London right now, you may have seen the Met Police experimenting with such vehicles recently. With a captive population, a collapsed infrastructure, and little international scrutiny, the IDF has got carte blanche to experiment, retaliate, and demonstrate strength. This leftover strike, inverted commas, mentality is not just a military tactic now, approved of by the top brass. It is a form of psychological warfare, reminding Gazans that they're worth nothing to Israel, that they're always within the blast radius no matter where the war is, and that this is how little their lives are worth. The precedent this sets is global, though. If Israel can drop unused bombs on a civilian population with impunity, what stops the United States doing it, or Russia, or China, or anyone else from adopting similar policies in their conflicts? Who will stop them? Or will it be a case of that if they do it, there will be international condemnation and sanctions? But Israel, as always, remains the exception, remains above all of that. I think we can probably hazard a guess at that one, can't we? Nevertheless, it should be obvious that this erodes the fundamental norms of disengagement and the rules of warfare. Worse still, it treats all perceived enemies as part of a singular war map, merging distinct conflicts into one rolling campaign of destruction. Israel always the root cause no matter where the conflicts arise, but nothing ever getting done about it, because we'll hear ad nauseum that Israel has a right to defend itself, won't we? Calls are already emerging for this policy to be investigated as a war crime, though. Legal experts have pointed to Article 51 of the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. If justice is going to become more than a slogan and some pretty words on a piece of paper, then survivors and victims' families must be able to challenge Israel in international courts. But as always, whether that will happen remains to be seen. What happened during Israel's 12-day Iran operation was not merely collateral damage, it was a declaration. It was a declaration that Gaza exists not just as a battlefield, but as a disposable wasteland for Israel's military ambitions. But this went largely completely unreported as a scandal unto itself. The world must reckon with the implications of such stories as these, and the fact they're not getting heard. A rogue state engaged in multiple illegal wars, casually layering one genocide on top of another. Gaza is not a weapons dump. Gaza is not disposable. Gaza deserves to live, as do all of the people within it, and we need to keep talking about that. We need to keep raising these stories that go so poorly reported. So please share this video to get it out there. Please share the articles it's sourced from in the description to raise awareness, because stuff like this should be headline news, not limited to alternative and foreign news outlets, Western mainstream media keeping us dumbed down as much as possible. In a similar vein to this story, another story you aren't supposed to see within the genocide of Gaza itself is the specific targeting by Israel of medical staff in the besieged strip. Doctors under attack, if you will. Well, if the BBC had its way, you'd never have seen the superb No Holds Barred documentary they'd commissioned, but were too scared to show. Scared of the Israel lobby. Luckily, Channel 4 weren't afraid and showed it themselves, and everyone who can see it needs to. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, but of spreading the word and helping to support this channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people when too many other mainstream media outlets won't do it. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid, therefore. Cheers, folks.